Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on politics in Africa and Arabia. The Tunisian judiciary has ordered the arrest of former Prime Minister Ali Larayet. Larayet and other officials of the Islamist Ennahda party are accused of having involved Tunisians in fighting alongside extremists in Syria, said defense lawyer Ines Harat. An anti-terrorist judge ordered Larayet's arrest on Monday. The Ennahda party spoke of a political attack with which the government and President Kais Saied tried to distract from the failure of the elections at the weekend. According to the Electoral Commission, only 11.22% of those entitled cast their votes in the first round of voting. The second ballot is scheduled for January 19th. Another, of which Larayet is vice president, called for a boycott of the election, as did other opposition parties. They accuse Saied of authoritarian tendencies. He had suspended the parliament in which the Ennahda was the strongest party in the summer of 2021 and dissolved it in March. In a constitutional referendum in July, a majority voted in favor of broad presidential powers. In September, Saied also changed the electoral law to limit the role of political parties. Critics accuse him of undermining the independence of the judiciary and parliament. The so-called Arab Spring began in Tunisia in 2011. President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali left the country after 23 years in power. Tunisia then initiated far-reaching democratic reforms. Israeli President Isaac Herzog is concerned about the new coalition government that will include religious fundamentalists and right-wing nationalists. A situation in which Israeli citizens face threats because of their identity or values is contrary to the country's fundamental democratic and ethical principles, is what President Isaac Herzog wrote on Twitter on Sunday. Earlier, a nominated new government official from the right-wing religious Zionism party said on the radio that hotels should be allowed to refuse services to people on religious grounds. Prime Minister-designate Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated on Sunday that his government would ensure equality. We will not allow members of the LGBTQ community to be discriminated against or violate the rights of other citizens in Israel, he said. Nevertheless, his political rivals accused the conservative politician of being vulnerable to the political demands of his far-right allies. Netanyahu has been prime minister on several occasions. A corruption survey is currently running against him. In particular, the planned appointment of Itamar Ben-Gvir of the ultranationalist Jewish Force Party and Bezalel Smotrich of religious Zionism to the government has sparked concerns among Palestinians, liberal Israelis, and abroad. Both reject a Palestinian state and support the expansion of Israeli territory into the occupied West Bank. Ben-Gvir is to become security minister with responsibilities for the police, while Smotrich's party is to be given control of planning in the West Bank. In addition, the head of the religious Shah's party, Aryeh Deri, who has been convicted of tax fraud, wants to become finance minister of all things. In the parliamentary elections in early November, the bloc led by Netanyahu won 64 of the 120 seats in the Knesset. After Netanyahu initially announced that he would quickly form a government, it was only weeks later and just minutes before an extension of the deadline on December 21st that he announced that he had now succeeded in forging an alliance. However, all the details have not yet been determined, but his cabinet should be ready in the next few days. The alliance's alignment has sparked international concern that a two-state solution advocated by many countries to end the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is now a distant project. German Federal Development Minister Svenja Schulze has warned that, in addition to the dire consequences of the Ukraine war, the plight of the millions of starving people in East Africa should not be forgotten. In the Horn of Africa, people are suffering dramatically from climate changes that they did not cause themselves, explained the Social Democratic politician. In order to support people in need there, Germany is providing 360 million euros, as her ministry announced on Thursday. Accordingly, the money should benefit the particularly affected countries of Somalia, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Millions of people in East Africa are starving because of the worst drought in 40 years. In some areas, people have been waiting for rain for 2 years now. And according to the minister, the sharp rise in grain, fertilizer, and energy prices caused by the Russian war of aggression is exacerbating the situation. In addition, there are regional conflicts and political crises. Solidarity, quick help, and perseverance are required here, said Schulze. Around 200 million euros of the funding is to be used to provide rapid and direct support to the population. In Somalia and Sudan, the money is primarily aimed at pregnant women and mothers with children. They are particularly affected by hunger. And according to the ministry, almost 2 million children are undernourished in Somalia alone. In addition, the money should flow to local health centers. According to the ministry, the remaining 160 million euros will be used in longer term to adapt to climate change. For example, through the spread of grain varieties that are more resistant to climate change. And back to Israel. Israel's Prime Minister-elect Benjamin Netanyahu has distanced himself from his son's verbal attacks on officials responsible for his corruption trial. During a radio talk, Jair Netanyahu called for prosecutors and police officers to be tried for treason. I love my son Jair, who is an independent person with his own views. That's what Netanyahu wrote on Twitter. Everyone has the right to express criticism, but I do not agree with his statements published yesterday, the soon-to-be prime minister said. Jair Netanyahu claimed during the radio talk, there was a political coup here with bad intentions. The public prosecutor and the police knew that they were framing something on an innocent person who also happens to be the head of government elected by the Israeli people. In doing so, they would have repealed a democratic election. That's called subversion. That's called high treason. That is what Jair Netanyahu said. And he said, anyone can read in the code what the punishment for high treason is, and it's not a prison sentence. Well, Israeli media interpreted this as an allusion to the death penalty for high treason. Although Jair Netanyahu has no official position, he is considered an influential confidant of his father. The corruption trial against Benjamin Netanyahu has been ongoing since 2020. He is accused of fraud, breach of trust, and bribery. Netanyahu has always denied the allegations and has spoken of a witch hunt against him. After his election victory on November 1st, he managed to form a right-wing religious coalition, as you heard earlier in this video. His government is scheduled to be sworn in this week. They are planning far-reaching changes in the law and targeted weakening of the judicial system. According to experts, the changes could also result in the trial against Netanyahu being overturned. A terrorist attack in Iraq killed 8 people and wounded 3 others. Armed terrorists attacked the residents of a village about 60 kilometers from the capital Baghdad from motorcycles. That's what the state agency INA reported on Tuesday. The attack bears the signature of the terrorist militia Islamic State or ISIS. The South African Bishops' Conference has called for reforms in the governing African National Congress or ANC party. They addressed clear words to the leadership of the state and party. For the head of state and party leader Cyril Ramaphosa, it is now necessary to liberate Africa's oldest liberation movement from corrupt representatives and their influence. That was according to a statement published on Friday by the Catholic Bishops' Parliamentary Office. Otherwise, Nelson Mandela's party could lose the government majority. The warning follows the party convention earlier this week, which confirmed Ramaphosa as leader for the next 5 years. In the past decade, the ANC has repeatedly made headlines with corruption and other government scandals. A number of high-ranking party representatives, including ministers, enriched themselves at the expense of the state treasury. Ex-President Jacob Zuma is considered the mastermind. This caused resentment in the emerging country, where more than half of the 60 million inhabitants live in poverty. The episcopal representatives see Ramaphosa's recent victory over the Zuma faction in the best interests of the country. As a result, the reform-oriented forces would clearly have won the upper hand. Nevertheless, the country, which has been led by the African National Congress since the end of apartheid in 1994, is presumably heading for its first coalition government. According to internal party polls, support for the ANC slipped to 39%. There will be an election in 1 year. Germany and Nigeria want to further strengthen their cooperation against climate change and for energy change. Both countries want to work together to tackle the biggest common global challenge, the biggest security threat for us all in this world, the climate crisis, said the German foreign minister on Tuesday after meeting her Nigerian counterpart Geoffrey Onyeama in the capital Abuja. The climate crisis must be contained with all our might. Africa and especially Nigeria have great potential for renewable energies and green hydrogen. Nigeria, which is the largest oil producer on the African continent, is currently one of the largest emitters of the greenhouse gas CO2 and an exporter of fossil fuels in Africa, said Baerbock. The plans of the government in Abuja for an energy transition, with which the country should become climate neutral by 2060, are all the more important. It is important for us to walk this path together within the framework of energy partnerships, not only for climate protection but also for the development of the local economy, said German Foreign Minister Baerbock. And Baerbock said that she experienced impressively that the climate crisis is contributing to the security crisis. And she said that on Monday when she visited the stronghold of the Islamist terrorist militia Boko Haram. There, and in large parts of the region, climate change is a driver of terrorism and is fueling existing conflicts over resources, for example, between farmers and herdsmen. We know that the cancer of terrorism can destabilize a society and entire regions, said the minister. Nigeria is around 2.5 times the size of Germany and, with around 220 million inhabitants, is the most populous and economically strongest country in Africa. The main industry is oil production. The country is the seat of the Regional Economic Organization ECOWAS, the mainstay of the African Union, and also an important provider of troops in UN peacekeeping missions. Zambia has abolished the death penalty. A law was also annulled that had prohibited the citizens of the southern African state from defaming the head of state. President Hichilema signed a corresponding amendment to the penal code. He was fulfilling a campaign promise with this. Hichilema was elected to office last year after decades in opposition. The abolished provisions dated back to the colonial era. Human rights activists and non-governmental organizations reacted happily to the abolition. Kenyan athletics is once again sinking into the doping quagmire. Several athletes have now been suspended for misconduct, and that includes the winner of the Boston Marathon. So last year's winner of the Boston Marathon has been banned for doping, along with 4 other athletes from Kenya. The Independent Integrity Commission of the World Athletics Association announced that a total of 5 athletes received sanctions. On the other hand, everyone can still take action before the International Sports Court, CAS. Marathon runner Diana Kipyokai received a 6-year ban on Tuesday, and the 28-year-old will be stripped of her victory in Boston last year. After her success in the Classic on October 11 in 2021, a banned substance was discovered in a doping test. Kipyokai then tried to explain the result with fake information. It was said that this could be clarified with the help of Kenya's anti-doping agency. Kipyokai did not object to the ban. The marathon runner Puriti Rionoripo, winner in Paris in 2017, was banned for 5 years. Betty Wilson-Lampus is initially suspended after a success at the half marathon in Paris last year. These two also tried to disguise the reasons for their positive doping tests. Commission Chief Brett Clothier said that such an approach would not be accepted and described it as a possible turning point that Kenya's government plans to spend a total of $25 million on the fight against doping over the next 5 years. Already on Monday, the Commission had announced multi-year bans for 3 athletes from Kenya. The country is under pressure from the World Athletics Federation because of the numerous cases that have been uncovered. An influential Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander has described regional rival Saudi Arabia as America's scum. Saudi Arabia is America's scum and not worthy of being treated as an enemy. That's what Brigadier General Ismaili Ghani, commander of the Al-Quds Brigade, said on Tuesday to the Tasnim news agency. Ghani succeeds Commander Qassem Soleimani, who was killed in a US drone strike in January 2020. The political leadership in Tehran had already sharpened its tone towards Saudi Arabia in the past few weeks. Iran accuses the Sunni kingdom of fueling protests against the Islamic Republic by funding Persian TV programs abroad. Recently, there had been overtures to improve diplomatic relations between the two countries, but the relationship is likely to be damaged again by statements by Ghani. After an attack by Iranian Islamists on the Saudi embassy in Tehran in 2016, the Gulf states severed ties. Both states carry out their rivalry through proxy wars, including in Yemen and Syria. After almost 5 years of a diplomatic ice age, several rounds of talks recently took place in Iraq. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.